Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
So, it is Wednesday, March 11th, 2026.
Day 12.
Exactly. Day 12 of the Iran war. And as if navigating a rapidly escalating conflict in the Middle East wasn't complex enough for you to track today, we are simultaneously watching a staggering collision of severe, chaotic weather emergencies right here in the U.S.
Yeah, it's a massive convergence.
It really is. You're dealing with a day where international military operations and domestic infrastructure crises are just actively competing for the top spot on your dashboard.
Right.
It's an incredibly dense, volatile 24-hour period, which is exactly why we are pulling all of this apart for you today.
And it is the kind of convergence that forces you to reevaluate how resilient our foundational systems actually are. I mean, we are watching real-time stress tests on global energy markets, international diplomatic coalitions, and domestic supply chains, all at the exact same moment.
Yeah.
Trying to parse out the signal from the noise today requires a very specific kind of lens.
Which brings us perfectly to the source material and our mission for this deep dive. We are anchoring today's analysis on a specific daily intel brief generated by the Ping AI blog.
A really fascinating brief, too.
It is. What makes this particular brief so interesting isn't just the summary it spits out, it's the methodology behind it. This is a raw synthesis of 40 different real-time monitored feeds.
40 feeds all running concurrently.
Right. The AI is simultaneously aggregating 28 feeds dedicated purely to domestic weather systems, 6 feeds tracking active conflict data, 4 global news feeds, and 2 state media feeds.
That allocation is wild when you think about it.
It is, and our
Yeah.
mission is to extract the critical so whats from this massive aggregation of data and help you navigate the strategic landscape of the next 24 to 48 hours.
Because the feed allocation itself tells a profound story about the current threat matrix.
How so?
Well, the fact that the algorithm is prioritizing 28 separate weather anomaly feeds alongside 6 active combat feeds.
It highlights the dual-front reality we're operating in.
Exactly. We are looking at a scenario where the immediate operational capability of states is being challenged by both kinetic military action abroad and massive atmospheric disruption at home.
It's a lot to process. Now, before we get into the tactical details of these feeds, I need to explicitly state something for you, our listener.
Very important point here.
Yeah. The data we are synthesizing today involves highly sensitive, politically charged military actions and geopolitical maneuvering. We are looking at active warfare.
Right.
So we want to be absolutely clear that we are not taking sides, nor are we endorsing any specific military strategies, political viewpoints, or state narratives.
Not at all.
Our role here is strictly to impartially unpack the facts, the data points, and the competing narratives exactly as they've been aggregated and presented by the Ping AI briefing. We're just mapping the terrain of this intelligence for you.
And that is a critical baseline to establish. In an active conflict zone, information is weaponized just as effectively as conventional munitions.
Oh, absolutely.
Our objective is to analyze how these events are unfolding and critically examine how they're being framed by the various state and non-state actors. The overarching theme we are exploring today, the why behind all of these disparate data points, is the profound fragility of our interconnected global systems when military escalation and natural disasters streak simultaneously.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start with the most severe geopolitical escalation flagged in the conflict feeds.
The Minab situation.
Yeah. The Ping AI synthesis brings us face-to-face with the grim realities of precision weaponry in dense urban environments. The intelligence brief has aggregated multiple confirmations of a U.S. missile strike hitting an elementary school in the southern Iranian city of Minab.
Tragic, just a devastating data point.
It is. The cross-reference data, which includes reports from the New York Times, widespread Google alerts, and interestingly, the Russian state news agency TASS confirms this was a U.S. Tomahawk missile and that the strike was the result of a targeting error.
The term targeting error in the context of modern precision-guided munitions opens up a highly complex operational discussion.
Right, because people hear precision and assume zero mistakes.
Exactly. We are currently looking at the initial phases of a U.S. military investigation, but from a broader analytical standpoint, this incident exposes the inherent friction of urban warfare.
Walk us through that friction.
Well, a Tomahawk cruise missile relies on an incredibly sophisticated array of guidance systems. You've got GPS, terrain contour matching.
Digital scene matching, right?
Right, digital scene matching. But the ultimate efficacy of that weapon is entirely dependent on the targeting package generated by intelligence on the ground,
The human element.
or the electronic intelligence element. When you are operating in a dense, multi-use urban zone like Minab, the margin for error isn't just small, it is functionally non-existent.
Wow.
A slight degradation in electronic intelligence, a GPS spoofing anomaly, or just a misidentification of a structural footprint means a devastating failure.
And the feeds were already showing the strategic fallout from that failure, completely outstripping the immediate kinetic damage.
Oh, absolutely.
The brief notes that casualty figures are still fluid, but the geopolitical shockwaves are solidifying right now. I want to challenge the standard assumption here, though.
Go for it.
We know errors happen in warfare. It's horrible, but it's a reality. But in an information ecosystem as saturated as ours,
Yeah.
how quickly does a mechanical or intelligence failure of this magnitude mutate into a strategic weapon for the adversary?
What's fascinating here is the velocity of that mutation.
It's almost instant, right?
It is instant. The moment that confirmation hits the feeds, the narrative slips entirely out of the control of the U.S. military apparatus.
They can't walk it back.
They can't. This specific error doesn't just risk severe diplomatic backlash from neutral observers. It provides instantaneous, highly emotive fuel for anti-U.S. operations.
Yeah.
From a psychological warfare perspective, the intent behind the strike is completely irrelevant to the adversary. The outcome of struck school becomes the ultimate rallying cry.
It just galvanizes the opposition.
Exactly. It provides hardline factions within the Iranian leadership with the exact justification they need to consolidate power domestically and escalate their retaliatory parameters.
And the Ping AI brief explicitly flags the rising probability of an asymmetric response from Tehran in the wake of Minab. But let's look at the operational reality of that.
Right.
We know Iran isn't going to launch a conventional air-to-air campaign against U.S. carrier strike groups. That's not their playbook.
No, it would be a losing strategy.
So what specific vectors are these conflict feeds looking for when they warn of asymmetry in this specific theater?
That is the exact question military planners are grappling with today. An asymmetric response means leveraging specific, localized advantages to bypass conventional U.S. overmatch.
So not fighting force with force.
Exactly. In this theater, that translates to a few highly probable vectors. First, the activation of proxy militia networks across Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon to harass U.S. forward operating bases.
That's classic asymmetric warfare.
Yes. Second, we have to look at the maritime domain. Iran has highly developed capabilities in fast attack swarm tactics and anti-ship mining operations in the Persian Gulf.
Which threatens global shipping.
Massively. And third, perhaps most difficult to attribute in real time, is the cyber domain, targeting critical infrastructure, financial institutions, or logistical networks of the U.S. and its regional allies.
So they don't even need to fire a physical weapon to strike back.
Right. The Minab error doesn't just change the political temperature, it likely alters the target deck for Iranian strategic command.
And that target deck is already expanding because the escalation in the last 24 hours was not limited to southern Iran.
No, things heated up significantly up north.
The conflict feeds have aggregated massive data spikes coming out of the capital. We are looking at reports of severe U.S.-Israeli airstrikes targeting fuel depots and residential areas in eastern Tehran.
The geographic specifics of that targeting data are highly significant. Eastern Tehran is a dense, heavily populated urban matrix.
Very dense.
The fact that the strikes were aimed at Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps installations, IRGC sites nested within those residential grids, further underscores the blurring of military and civilian infrastructure.
The raw data being pulled from Grok and X feeds into the Ping AI dashboard, paints a terrifying logistical picture.
What are the user feeds showing?
We are seeing user-generated reports and visual confirmations of massive explosions, extreme thermal signatures just lighting up the skyline, and catastrophic damage to the city's energy processing infrastructure.
Just a total disruption.
And alongside the destruction of those fuel depots, the feeds are reporting 40 civilian casualties resulting from the strikes on those embedded IRGC sites.
Odd.
Putting the immediate human tragedy aside for a moment, let's look at the systemic impact. I want you to imagine hitting the fuel depots in a megacity of that size.
Yeah.
That is a deliberate move to paralyze the metropolitan nervous system.
Precisely. You have to analyze this through the lens of urban logistics. The objective of neutralizing fuel depots is to sever the adversary's operational mobility.
Grounding their vehicles.
Right. An army cannot maneuver, resupply, or sustain defensive operations without a constant flow of refined petroleum. But the dual-use nature of that infrastructure means you are simultaneously severing the civilian lifeline.
Because the civilians use that same fuel.
Exactly. When you destroy the fuel reserves of a city like Tehran, you immediately degrade emergency medical services, you compromise the power grids reliant on backup generators, and you freeze civilian evacuation corridors.
It's total paralysis.
The strategic intent is paralysis, but the collateral reality, those 40 civilian casualties, acts as an immense accelerant for international condemnation. It forces allied nations to reassess the diplomatic cost of their public support for the coalition.
Which brings us directly to the retaliatory phase of this intelligence cycle. And this is where the feeds shift from regional military strikes to global economic shockwaves.
The scope expands drastically here.
Because Iran did not delay its response, and they chose a target that bypasses the immediate U.S. military footprint entirely. The brief details a major Iranian drone attack on the United Arab Emirates, specifically targeting the Ruwais refinery.
We need to pause and establish the sheer scale of that specific target. The Ruwais facility is not a standard regional processing plant.
No,
It is a foundational pillar of the global energy supply chain.
According to the operational data in the brief, Ruwais is the fourth largest refinery on the planet.
The fourth largest.
The cross-referenced X and Grok feeds are tracking massive structural fires and severe operational disruptions across the facility complex. The one crucial data point of relief here is that the feeds are currently reporting 0 casualties at the site.
Which is a miracle, honestly.
Yeah, but from a market perspective, the damage is already priced in.
That is the critical distinction. The physical damage to the infrastructure translates immediately into a structural shock to the spot market.
Because the capacity just vanishes.
When you take the fourth largest refinery offline, you aren't just squeezing a regional supply line, you are directly threatening roughly 10 to 15% of global refining capacity in a single tactical stroke.
That is a staggering percentage.
You are severely degrading the world's ability to process heavy crude into the distillates, aviation fuels, and middle distillates that actually power global commerce.
So what does this all mean? If you are listening to this right now, how does a drone swarm hitting a processing facility on the Persian Gulf translate into the macroeconomics of your daily life?
It hits the kitchen table fast.
Right. We are talking about a massive disruption to a highly optimized, just-in-time global supply chain.
It translates into immediate, aggressive volatility in the commodities markets. The primary indicator we are watching is Brent crude pushing aggressively toward and likely beyond the $100 per barrel threshold.
Which trickles down to everything.
The secondary and tertiary effects are where the real economic pain resides. When the refining capacity drops, the cost of diesel spikes.
And diesel moves everything.
Diesel is the engine of the global freight network. When freight costs surge, the consumer price index reacts almost instantly. We are looking at a scenario where this single strike could inject a massive secondary jolt of inflation into Western economies that have spent the last 3 years desperately trying to cool their markets.
But wait, let's look at the tactical reality of this strike for a second. The UAE operates some of the most sophisticated, multi-layered air and missile defense systems in the world, heavily integrated with U.S. architecture.
Patriot batteries, 280 systems.
Exactly. How does an Iranian drone strike successfully penetrate that airspace to hit the fourth largest refinery in the world? Is the brief indicating a failure in that defensive tech, or are we looking at an overwhelming swarm tactic designed to saturate those defenses?
The intelligence feeds haven't provided the post-strike battle damage assessment yet, but historically in facilities like Ruwais or the Abqaiq processing facility in Saudi Arabia back in 2019, the vulnerability lies in the asymmetric nature of the attack.
Going under the radar.
Literally. You don't need a ballistic missile to cause catastrophic economic damage. A coordinated swarm of low-flying, low-radar cross-section loitering munitions can exploit the gaps in traditional high-altitude air defense radars.
They just fly right past the big systems.
The strategic nightmare here isn't just the tactical penetration, it's the geopolitical realignment.
The UAE getting pulled in.
The UAE has spent years meticulously balancing its economic ties with Tehran against its security reliance on Washington. This strike violently pulls Abu Dhabi off the fence and directly into the kinetic fray.
That is the ultimate escalation risk. If the UAE decides that its critical infrastructure cannot be protected through diplomatic balancing, what happens to the regional security architecture?
You start looking at the invocation of collective defense mechanisms.
The treaty's getting triggered.
If the UAE formally requests expanded military intervention or mutual defense protocols from the Gulf Cooperation Council or the U.S., this conflict ceases to be a bilateral U.S.-Iran engagement. It completely internationalizes the battle space.
Pulls everyone in.
And the geographic choke point for all of this is the Strait of Hormuz. If the UAE is actively engaged and Iran feels boxed in, the risk to commercial shipping through Hormuz skyrockets.
And if that closes?
If that waterway is compromised, you aren't just looking at an oil price spike, you are looking at a fundamental rewiring of the global energy trade.
And while the physical infrastructure of the global economy is under attack, the Ping AI synthesis reveals a completely parallel battle taking place in the information domain.
The narrative war.
Exactly. This takes us to the third major vector of the briefing, the information war and fracturing alliances. The tool is simultaneously pulling from Al Jazeera and TESS, the Russian state media apparatus.
It's incredible to watch.
Watching how these feeds process the exact same kinetic events into completely divergent strategic narratives is incredible.
Analyzing the information space is just as critical as analyzing troop movements. The narrative dictates the diplomatic maneuvering space for every nation involved.
That's so a task.
When we look at the TESS feeds, we see a highly calculated information operation. They are heavily amplifying the U.S. targeting error at the Minab school, aggressively anchoring the blame on Washington.
Sure, that makes sense from their angle.
But the sophisticated part of their operation is how they are coupling that narrative with a completely distinct geopolitical theater.
Right, the brief flags that TASS is simultaneously pushing a narrative regarding a Ukrainian missile attack in Bryansk, Russia.
Right.
And they aren't just reporting it as a standard cross-border strike, they are explicitly framing it as a coordinated Western plot designed to intentionally sabotage ongoing peace negotiations.
We are witnessing real-time strategic synchronization by Moscow.
Tying the two wars together.
By directly linking the U.S. failure in Iran with alleged Western sabotage in Ukraine, Russia is executing a multi-layered diplomatic strategy. First, they are attempting to severely degrade U.S. moral and operational credibility on the global stage,
Painting the U.S. as the aggressor everywhere.
Second, they are actively aligning their state narrative with Iranian grievances, solidifying that strategic partnership.
Building the anti-Western coalition.
And third, by portraying the West as an agent of chaos in both theaters, Moscow is trying to position itself as the rational, stabilizing mediator in the Middle East. It is a deliberate effort to fragment the international consensus and isolate Washington.
And while TESS is spinning that macro geopolitical narrative, the Al Jazeera feeds are providing a very different kind of analysis focused strictly on the military realities of the Iranian theater.
They're looking at the map.
Yeah. The Ping AI dashboard highlights a consensus among Al Jazeera's military analysts that a full-scale U.S. ground invasion of Iran is highly improbable.
Highly improbable.
They heavily cite the geographic constraints, specifically the Zagros and Elburz mountain ranges. But is that geographical determinism entirely accurate given modern U.S. air mobility and expeditionary capabilities?
It is a vital constraint to acknowledge, even with advanced capabilities. Iran is geostrategically fortified.
It's basically a fortress.
The Zagros Mountains form a massive, rugged barrier along the western frontier that makes a conventional mass armor land invasion logistically nightmarish.
You can't just roll tanks through.
The sheer amount of resources required to secure supply lines through those passes against a highly motivated, entrenched defense force would result in casualty projections that are politically unviable for any U.S. administration. The Al Jazeera analysis is grounded in the reality of force-to-space ratios in extreme terrain.
But the brief immediately juxtaposes the improbability of a mass invasion with a high feasibility of small, precise missions. We are talking about special operations, targeted raids.
Exactly. The intelligence feeds suggest the threat matrix favors specialized over the horizon operations. The insertion of Tier 1 units to sabotage nuclear enrichment sites, neutralize specific command and control nodes, or secure critical intelligence assets.
Getting in and getting out.
However, the escalation trap here is profound. Even a highly localized, temporary U.S. footprint on Iranian sovereign soil crosses a massive psychological and geopolitical red line.
It's still an invasion, technically.
The belief that a state can execute a limited kinetic action on sovereign territory without triggering uncontrolled, full-spectrum retaliation is one of the most dangerous fallacies in military planning.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see how the compounding pressure of these factors, the civilian casualties in Minab and Tehran, the economic shockwaves from Ruwais, the aggressive Russian information ops, is creating severe structural fractures within traditional Western alliances.
The brief pulls a major diplomatic data point from the European feeds to illustrate exactly that. Spain has officially recalled its ambassador from Israel.
That is huge.
And the explicit justification flagged in the diplomatic cables is a direct protest over the expanding scope of the Iran war, coupled with ongoing military actions in Gaza. This isn't just diplomatic posturing. Recalling an ambassador is a severe institutional rupture.
It is a massive indicator of coalition degradation. Spain is not a peripheral player. They are a major NATO ally and a highly influential voice within the European Union.
Right, they have real sway.
Throughout the initial phases of these overlapping crises, there was a concerted effort by the U.S. to project a unified, impenetrable Western diplomatic front. But as the conflict metastasizes and the civilian toll dominates the international feeds, the domestic political pressure on European leaders becomes unsustainable.
They have voters to answer to.
Exactly. When Madrid pulls its ambassador, it shatters the illusion of consensus. It provides immediate diplomatic cover for other wavering EU nations to distance themselves from U.S. and Israeli policy.
The domino effect.
It forces Washington to fight a two-front diplomatic war, managing the adversary in the Middle East while desperately trying to patch the leaks in its own alliance structure.
Here's where it gets really interesting. And frankly, this is where the ping AI synthesis proves its value, because it forces us to look at the entirely separate, massive crisis unfolding domestically.
The weather feeds.
While the international feeds are dominated by Middle Eastern airstrikes and European diplomatic fractures, the U.S. homeland feeds are flashing red with dual catastrophic weather emergencies.
It's a surreal split screen.
We are looking at an incredible level of cognitive dissonance today. You have a population simultaneously doom-scrolling through a foreign war and tracking life-threatening weather anomalies in their own zip codes.
It perfectly illustrates the concept of compound security threats. Geopolitical crises do not exist in a vacuum. They overlap with the physical realities of the domestic environment.
The resources get split.
The logistical and federal resources required to manage a massive homeland weather emergency are now in direct competition with the bandwidth required to manage an international military crisis.
Let's break down the data coming out of the National Weather Service feeds, starting with the Pacific Northwest. The NWS has issued severe, widespread blizzard warnings that are projected to hold through tomorrow, March 12th.
And the geographic spread is enormous.
To give you a sense of the spread the brief is tracking, we are looking at alerts covering West Glacier in Montana, western Chelan County in Washington, the entire Olympic Peninsula, and a massive contiguous stretch of the Cascades encompassing Whatcom, Skagit, Snohomish, King, Pierce, and Lewis counties.
Just a wall of snow.
This is a staggering footprint of severe winter weather hitting highly populated corridors.
The meteorological data aggregated here points to an extreme atmospheric event. We aren't looking at standard winter accumulation.
What makes it extreme?
The feeds are indicating heavy, wet snow loading combined with extreme wind shear, creating sustained whiteout conditions. The immediate operational impact is the isolation of over 100,000 residents.
Over 100,000 people cut off.
We are looking at total travel paralysis. The major east-west arteries, particularly the passes along I-90 and Highway 2, are entirely compromised. The backcountry and mountain corridor avalanche risks are at critical levels.
So no one is moving.
But the most dangerous vector for civilian populations in these conditions is the high probability of systemic power grid failures in sub-freezing temperatures due to infrastructure icing and tree falls.
And we have to connect the logistical dots here. Earlier, we discussed how the strikes on Ruwais and the Tarampule depots were structurally shocking the global energy supply chain. Well, these blizzards are executing a localized stress test on the U.S. supply chain at the exact same time.
The ports.
Right. Major freight hubs, like the Port of Seattle, are facing severe operational delays. You have a massive backlog of maritime cargo that cannot be offloaded because the outbound trucking logistics are completely paralyzed by the closed mountain passes.
Goods are just sitting there.
It is a compounding domestic bottleneck happening in the middle of a global logistical crisis.
That compounding effect is the exact definition of systemic fragility. And the data from the Pacific Northwest is only half of the domestic threat profile.
Right, there's more.
The feeds tracking the Midwest and the southern U.S. are aggregating a completely different, arguably more acute meteorological threat.
The brief pivots from tracking blizzard whiteouts to tracking massive convective storm systems. We are seeing widespread tornado watches active until this evening across a massive swath of the country.
It's a huge system.
The NWS alerts are painting a target across Ohio, stretching from Ashland to Lake counties. The entire Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky tri-state area is under watch.
The whole corridor.
We are tracking alerts down through Kentucky from Bath to Rowan, across Indiana from Clark to Perry, and then the system expands violently southward, covering massive population centers in Texas from Austin down to the Galveston Bay, and sweeping across Louisiana from Allen to Evangeline parishes.
Wow.
This is a multi-state, multi-region threat matrix covering over 20 separate counties.
The atmospheric physics indicated by a watch box of that magnitude, likely driven by a severe collision of early spring Gulf moisture with a late winter cold front, suggests an extremely volatile environment.
A powder keg.
The specific hazards flagged by the NWS are comprehensive. High probability tornadic activity, destructive large hail, and rapid onset flash flooding.
And has hit in cities.
The critical concern here is the density of the target zones. We are looking at major urban and suburban matrices, Cleveland, Houston, the Louisville metro area sitting directly in the path of these supercells.
That's millions of people.
The AI synthesis pulls historical NWS data to provide a baseline, warning that conditions are favorable for 10 to 20 separate tornado touchdowns today.
An outbreak of that scale requires an immediate, massive mobilization of federal resources. The brief explicitly notes the high probability of activating FEMA response protocols across multiple regions simultaneously.
FEMA is going to be stretched thin.
But how does that massive physical deployment interact with the cyber threats we were analyzing earlier?
Yeah.
Because the Ping AI tool specifically cross-referenced these weather outages with the threat of Iranian cyber retaliation.
That cross-reference highlights the ultimate risk multiplier. Our domestic power grids are inherently vulnerable during massive weather events. A tornado physically destroying substations or a blizzard downing transmission lines degrades the network's capacity to reroute power.
The grid is already bleeding.
If an advanced persistent threat group, say, an Iranian state-sponsored cyber unit, times a distributed denial of service attack or a ransomware injection into the grid's control systems at the exact moment the physical infrastructure is failing.
And operators are scrambling to balance the load?
The resulting cascading failure could plunge multiple regions into prolonged darkness. You are combining a kinetic weather event with an asymmetric cyber strike to achieve maximum systemic paralysis.
It is an incredibly sobering analysis of our vulnerabilities, which is why the final section of the Ping AI brief is so critical. We are moving into actionable intelligence and the what-to-watch matrix.
Turning the data into a plan.
The synthesis engine has mapped out the specific data points you need to monitor to stay ahead of this threat curve over the next 2 days. Let's start with the immediate operational window. What specific feeds are we prioritizing in the next 12 hours?
The next 12 hours require a focus on acute, localized impacts and immediate geopolitical responses. Domestically, the absolute priority is the NWS radar feeds tracking the tornadic development across those Midwest and Southern watch boxes. That is an immediate threat to life and infrastructure.
Right.
Internationally, the primary intelligence target is the official diplomatic and military response from Tehran regarding the Minab school strike. The rhetoric and posture of that response will dictate the escalation ladder for the rest of the week.
And the economy.
Economically, we need continuous satellite and on-the-ground assessments of the Ruwais refinery fires. Containment versus expansion of that damage dictates the immediate market reaction.
Moving into the 24 to 48-hour tactical window, the brief shifts focus to the secondary effects. We need to monitor the feeds for the preliminary outcomes of the U.S. military investigation into the Minab targeting failure.
That report is going to be scrutinized globally.
How the Pentagon publicly addresses that intelligence gap will heavily influence the European diplomatic narrative. We're also watching the UAE's defense posture. Are they scrambling additional air defense assets, or are they signaling for GCC military support?
Watching for that collective defense trigger.
And on the domestic front, the feeds will transition from tracking the blizzard to tracking the infrastructure recovery in the Cascades and the Olympics. How quickly can they restore power and clear the freight corridors?
And beyond the tactical window, the brief identifies the strategic indicators. These are the macro trends that signal a fundamental shift in the global operating environment.
Like the oil prices.
You have to monitor the Brent crude ticker. If the markets price in the Ruwais damage in oil, crosses that $100 per barrel line and sustains it, we are entering a new phase of global inflation.
A completely new phase.
Watch the diplomatic cables coming out of the EU. Spain recalled its ambassador, but we need to see if nations like Ireland, Belgium, or France begin to mirror that distancing.
The domino effect again.
Monitor the Russian state feeds to see if their mediation narrative gains any traction with non-aligned nations. And continuously refresh the NWS feeds because the weather matrix is highly fluid.
I want to take a brief moment to look at the meta layer of this entire exercise. The Ping AI conflict tool dashboard driving this intelligence is a fascinating evolution in how we consume geopolitical data.
It really is.
We are talking about 36 distinct live feeds, automated SMS alerting systems, all functioning to, as their tagline says, turn data into decisions. The fact that this level of synthesis is available on a subscription model, a basic tier at $1.99 a month and full API access for $9.99 is wild.
It represents a democratization, but also a commodification of strategic intelligence. Historically, the capacity to aggregate and analyze 28 weather feeds alongside 6 global conflict feeds in real time was a capability strictly reserved for national intelligence agencies and high-level military commands.
You needed a room full of analysts.
Now, it is a consumer product. In a hyper-connected environment where a drone strike in Abu Dhabi structurally alters the cost of domestic freight in Ohio the very next day, access to this kind of synthesized cross-domain data isn't just an analytical luxury, it is rapidly becoming a baseline requirement for institutional and individual navigation.
It fundamentally changes how we interact with the news cycle. All right, let's synthesize everything we've extracted from these feeds today.
It's a lot of ground covered.
We have tracked a staggering arc of instability. We started with the devastating realities of urban warfare and precision, targeting failures in Minab, Iran, and the strategic propaganda victory that handed to adversaries.
A major narrative shift.
We analyzed the catastrophic economic implications of the Ruwais refinery strike and the threat of the UAE internationalizing the conflict. We mapped the Russian information operations attempting to link the Middle East to Ukraine, while European alliances began to publicly fracture.
And then the domestic front.
And we brought it all the way back to the U.S. homeland, where severe blizzards in the Pacific Northwest and massive tornado outbreaks across the South and Midwest are actively threatening our supply chains and power grids.
This raises an important question.
Oh.
We have spent this entire deep dive meticulously unpacking the output of 40 highly sophisticated real-time data feeds. We possess the technological capacity to know the exact coordinates of a targeting failure in southern Iran, to monitor the precise thermal signature of a refinery fire on the Persian Gulf, and to track the atmospheric pressure of a supercell over Cleveland, all simultaneously.
Yeah, it's unprecedented awareness.
But here is the dynamic I want you to consider. In an era where our intelligence tools provide us with an omniscient, real-time awareness of every overlapping global and domestic crisis, does this unprecedented volume of data actually enhance our systemic resilience?
Does it actually help us survive it?
Exactly. Or does the sheer, unrelenting velocity of these cascading alerts simply paralyze our cognitive and institutional capacity to meaningfully respond to any of them?
That is exactly the kind of structural question this data forces us to confront. I want you to hold on to that thought as you navigate the rest of your week. Consider how the velocity of this information shapes your understanding of the world's fragility. Stay analytical, keep monitoring the shifts in both the global landscape and your local radar, and above all, stay safe out there. Thank you for joining us for this custom-tailored deep dive. We will be right back here, tracking the feeds and untangling the data next time.